Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 368 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Aylward, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our third book is called From Letters to Leaders, Leveraging Your Fraternity or Sorority Experience to Land Your Dream Job. So go and pick up that book today on Amazon. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, when I'm working with Gen Z, one of the biggest issues that I see is that students are constantly comparing themselves to other students. They're looking over the fence wondering, is the grass any greener on the other side of the fence? Especially when we're talking about careers and jobs. And so I wanted to bring our next guest onto the show to kind of give some clarity in terms of what to do next professionally. If you're stuck and you're not really sure where to go with this college degree, then you are talking to the right person today. You're in the right place today because Mark, our next guest, is going to tell you if you are on the right road and how to get to where you want to go. So our next guest, his name is Mark Aylward. Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
Oh, awesome. All right. So what Mark does is he helps people who have absolutely no effing idea what to do next professionally. And what makes Mark unique is that he brings highly developed active listening skills and deep empathy to a transactional field that is really steeped in mediocrity, to be quite honest with you. And I wanted to read to you what one of Mark's clients said about him in terms of working with him, because I think it really gives you good insight into what it would be like to work with Mark. He said, working with Mark was a transformative experience. Today, I feel confident and invigorated, eager to continue iteration on my redefined path to happiness and success. I wholeheartedly recommend Mark's coaching and mentorship to anyone seeking meaningful personal and professional growth. That is just amazing. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much. I really was looking forward to this particular interview because I think you have so much to offer college students in terms of your wisdom, your experience, and your coaching process. But I think it's really good to start with your undergraduate experience. Okay. So you decided on the University of Notre Dame for your college experience. Infamous university, beautiful place, certainly. But why did you choose Notre Dame of all places?
Yeah, it's a great question. I can't take much credit for it, though. When I was 16 or 17, contemplating what to do next, I didn't want to go to college. Mm-hmm. And I was taught, and back then, way back then, you just went to college if you could afford it and you could qualify for it, you just were expected to go. And so in talking to my dad, I grew up in Boston, and talking to my dad, I didn't want to go to an Ivy League school. I wanted to get out of there because he was a pilot. So I had traveled as a child and saw a lot of different places. And I wanted to go somewhere other than Harvard or, MIT or, God forbid I could have gotten in that. And, and my dad, we were Irish Catholic. And so my dad said to me, have you ever considered Notre Dame? And I thought, well, isn't that a football school? And he said, no, it's way more than that. And long story short, I applied and I got late admission and I went, and it was a fabulous experience that I just happened upon. And I'm very grateful for it. I met a lot of really nice people, a lot of really good people, a lot of really smart people from all over the world. So I had nothing to do with it, Mike.
I mean, it's so funny that you ended up there, only because, growing up in Boston, listen, my kids are looking at colleges right now, and we went to Boston. We toured Harvard, we toured MIT, Boston University, Boston College. There's no shortage of fantastic institutions in your backyard. So the fact that you ended up in Notre Dame, of all places, I'm sitting here scratching my head. I'm like, what? None of the schools were good enough? Like, what happened?
Yeah, no, I remember throwing my application to Harvard in the trash after getting about 25% of the way through it. I said, it's right down the street. I grew up here. I want to get somewhere else, All right. So
that makes sense. And, I think that there's a funny story here. How did you land in the recruiting business of all things?
So that's an interesting story as well. I found out that I was going to become a father. at 26 years old, and I was ready. I'd always wanted to be a dad, but I was not in a professional position to be able to support my family. So I needed to get quickly into a position where I could. And I happened to come into my parents' condo one day, and I was searching for something. I was lost. I knew I wanted more. And my mom's best friend was there with her new husband, and he was an Australian guy. And we got to talking over a glass of wine. And I said, "What do you do for a living?" And he said, "I'm a recruiter for petrochemical engineers in Saudi Arabia." And I said, "Unpack that for what the heck does that mean?" And he went on to tell me that these petrochemical engineers were very critically skilled, very specifically educated, very specifically competent. And Saudi Arabia was not a place that anybody who's not Saudi Arabian wants to live. So they put these lavish packages together, and they procured the services of this independent recruiter. And he went out in the world and brought people to positions and collected. I said, "What kind of fees do you get for those people?" He said, "Usually about 6 figures per person." And I that was the end of that discussion. I picked up the newspaper and I looked for recruiting jobs, and it suited me. It's a mediation, negotiation, arbiter type position, which is really good for my personality. And I responded to an ad for a company up in New Hampshire across the border. And they called me in for an interview, and they hired me on the spot. And so, again, I feel very fortunate, and it clicked with me immediately. And I met some really good people, some really good friends, some great recruiters. And I happen to have a great mentor as well, which is a great way to start. We can speak to that issue a little bit later.
Yeah, wow, you really ended up in all the right spots somehow, some way. You just landed in a perfect spot, which is fantastic, right? And you also started two staffing companies. You sold them for $3 million each. I'm wondering, as an entrepreneur who's built several businesses, did you have that particular exit strategy from the very beginning when you started these staffing companies, or was that something that just kind of naturally occurred as you were growing each of the businesses?
Yeah, another great question. The first one, I was a minority owner in. My mentor, my second mentor, my primary mentor, came to me one day after I'd worked for him as a recruiter for a couple of years and said, "Do you want to help me start a consulting firm?" And I said, "Well, what's a consulting firm?" And so he explained to me that instead of placing people and permanently and collecting a fee, we would hire these people and we would bill them out on an hourly basis and collect a margin. And so, long story short, he said, "I will fund it and I will do all the strategy work. And I need you to do all the tactical work, the hiring, the training, the operations stuff." And so I started that with him. And his plan was to get out of it in a few years. So I wasn't really driving that decision-making process. I agreed to it. And he cut me a big fat check when he sold the company. And I stayed around as the manager of the business after the fact. So I was not driving that car. I was in the passenger seat as a minority owner, but I learned everything there was to learn about starting a business. And I learned it from a guy who was an exceptionally talented guy. The second one, I started with a friend of mine, a colleague who also worked for our mentor. He and I started in that first business in New Hampshire and became fast friends as recruiters. And when we were ready to start that business, we discussed a couple of exit strategies, one of which is if either one of us wants to leave early, there's two scenarios. We can buy you out, or we can sell the company and split the proceeds. And then 10 years later, I got into a challenging personal situation, a contentious divorce. And that was the driving factor. He came to me one day and said, I don't think we can do this anymore with this noise circling around you. And I said, "Well, fair enough. I will go back to our original agreement." And we went looking around and shopping for a buyer, and we found one. And so neither one of those was really planned, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Life gets in the way, Mike, as you know.
I certainly know that as an entrepreneur, sometimes life takes us down roads that we didn't expect. But it's always interesting to me, especially when you have that exit, a successful exit like that. Was that from the intent, from the jump? You said we're going to build this and sell it off, or did this just happen because life happens? And so it sounds like it's option number two, and that's always an
Yeah.
interesting conversation for me.
Yeah.
And you also helped your adult children to start their own businesses, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. Again, like kind of passing on that mentorship and that guidance that they need. What was your advice to your own children about building their businesses? And ultimately, how did that turn out?
Yeah. Well, their mom was an entrepreneur as well. And so I was an entrepreneur. They grew up in the house of two entrepreneurs. And I think that's a unique experience. I think, you're more likely to become one if you have two parents that are entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
The first thing I did was I found them work out of school. And all three of them told me they got good jobs for more money than they thought they were going to get doing what they wanted to do. And they said, Dad, you have knowledge and experience that no one else is got out there, and you got to figure out a way to get this in front of more people, because nobody's teaching this stuff in school. Most of my friends come out of school, whether it's high school or college, completely ill prepared for what's ahead of them from a life standpoint, certainly from a professional standpoint. So, and then a couple of years went by, and they got the entrepreneurial itch, and they came to me, and we built some business plans together, and we had some serious sessions of rigorous sessions of exchanging knowledge and what to expect and the risks and the rewards to be expected. And yeah, it was a coaching experience. They're all three really good, teachable students, which I was grateful for, and they're all succeeding. One of them is succeeding incredibly well. The other one's right behind, and then the third one is right behind her. So all is well on that front. But the details of what I shared with them and what we went through, we could spend 5 hours talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, not that we have 5 hours, but let's assume for a moment that we have a college student listener who's listening right now. They have absolutely no idea what they want to do after graduation, which
Mhm.
many of them, they find themselves in that scenario, just really kind of wondering, should I be here? Should I be there? Looking at what their friends are doing, who's making money, who's not making money. I mean, what's your advice to these college student listeners who maybe are just lost at the moment?
Yeah, I certainly was. And at that juncture in my life, I think most people are. Very few people really know what they want to do at that young an age. Um, I think more than anything, and I do this with older people too, is the first step in the process is let's give ourselves permission to think broadly and deeply. Let's give ourselves permission to dream. Okay. Guidance counselors have advice, teachers have advice, coaches have advice, parents have advice. None of those people, all well-intentioned, right, probably understand you and what you want to do and the way you think as well as you do. And so, and they're in positions of superiority, so we tend to listen to them by default. So the first part is dreaming. The second part is, if you don't know what you want to do, go drive a truck or work at Costco and start developing a side gig. Start developing something that you can do at the intersection of what you love to do, what you're good enough at that you could teach someone else, and that you could figure out a way to monetize that. Because you can do that for a few hours a week while you're making 20 bucks an hour and at least paying the bills. Even if you're living at your parents' place, contribute a little rent to mom and dad while you're there. So that's the first thing I would do, is say, get the constraints off. Don't anybody that's telling you this is the way that you have to do this. No, it's not. You can do it any way you want. So I think the first thing I would tell people is just crack your skull open and start dreaming, and don't worry. Don't worry. It's fine. It'll be fine.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I like that a lot, especially the part about like, what are you good at? I think
Mhm.
that's really where we need to spend, a lot more time with. I mean, you look at, pick an athlete, that we all know, a Tiger Woods, a Michael Jordan. I mean, they had certain natural gifts to
Mhm.
do what they do day in and day out, but I mean, they practiced it relentlessly. I mean,
Yep.
stories that would blow your mind relentlessly day and night, and they just committed to those 10,000 hours that is famously
Yep.
spoken about. And I think ultimately that's assuming that somebody wants to pay you for that too. I mean, that's the other
Mhm.
thing, is somebody willing to pay you for that. But start with what you're really really good at, develop that side gig as you're suggesting, and see where it goes and try to get those 10,000 hours. I think if you do that, then you're going to be incredibly successful, and no matter what that is.
Yeah, and the other thing I think I would suggest to everybody, regardless of their age, but particularly young people, is once you figure out what you really want to do, but you can't quite get there yet, you can find a mentor.
Yeah.
And I think seeking out a mentor with purpose, intentionally, right? With a willingness to say to this person, him or her, who's already achieved success in the area that you want to achieve success in, and say, look, I will give you my entire energy, all of my attention, all of my work ethic, all of my skills, and in return for you teaching me everything that you know, and I will work my tail off for you in appreciation for that opportunity. Because what I really kicked it into gear when I find my second mentor, the guy who was willing to say, I'll fund this company if you help me build it, and you'll do all the work and I'll tell you what to do. That's a slam dunk. If you
Yeah.
can find that person.
That's where I think the college students have a big leg up on everybody else. Because if you're on LinkedIn and you're a college student asking me to be your mentor or just to do a 15-minute or a 20-minute informational interview, chances are I'm going to say yes. It might not be today because my schedule is packed, but within the next week or two, I will carve out 20 minutes to talk to anybody, especially as a college student,
Mm-hmm.
about advice on how to get to where I am, where the business is today. I'm more than happy to do it, especially because a college student probably isn't looking to sell me anything.
Right.
Whereas on LinkedIn, maybe somebody who's not a college student, maybe they have ulterior motives. They're trying to sell me some kind of product, right? But if it's a
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
college student just saying, hey, I just need some direction, I need a mentor, I need some advice, I mean, I would say yes every single time.
Yeah, I think we're all hardwired to want to help other people.
Yeah.
Some of us more so than others, but you can tell, I'm sure you can tell very quickly when you start talking to somebody, this person is well intentioned or they're not.
Right.
And an enthusiastic young person, I've surrounded myself with them my whole life, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're the best. That's why I love working with college students, because they're young people. They have, their whole lives ahead of them, and there's so much you can do at that pivotal juncture. So it's really, really an exciting time. What I'm sure you talk to people that are in this scenario often. What if somebody who's listening right now is stuck in a job that they absolutely hate? How can this person who's coming to you, how can they regain their clarity about the future and confidence, more importantly, in moving to the next job?
Yeah, I mean, you get online and start digging into topics that are interesting to you. Give yourself, you got to keep doing what you're doing. You got to keep the paycheck coming in. You got to keep the work. You have to be gainfully employed. That's a much more leveraged position to be in than being unemployed. So don't quit
There you
when
go.
you find out it's not what you want to do. You have some work to do before you quit, right? You have to have a place to land, right? That sounds obvious, but a lot of people don't think about that.
Right.
Um, and then the next thing is, we can put this link in the bottom. I have a free workbook called "Find Your True Purpose," and it's a really rigorous but simple but difficult exercise of self-reflection and self-awareness. So that's the strategic place to start. The tactical piece is doing the research. I mean, you can get your arms around anything that you want to know within a matter of seconds, right? That's just where we live. So get to work, stay employed, keep the paycheck coming in, find your true purpose, get to work researching what you want to do. And then it becomes tactical, interviewing, networking, all of that kind of stuff.
Excellent advice. I'll put a link to that free workbook in the show notes so that way people can just click on the link below and get access to that free workbook. I think that's going to be really, really helpful for our listeners. And the other thing I was thinking about too is LinkedIn. Obviously, you're really good at using LinkedIn to move your career forward, to build new connections, to build your network. How can our listeners make tweaks to their LinkedIn profile in order to get more job opportunities or more clients?
Yeah, it's another link. It's another workbook. I wrote it a couple years ago because I kept getting people to ask me this question,
Yeah.
and most people don't. Even people that are looking for work, when I look at their LinkedIn profiles, I'm like, this. It's either terrible or it's unclear, right? It's never buttoned up. So I wrote the workbook's called the LinkedIn cheat sheet, and I think it's 11 pages long. It's a couple years old, so there might be some user interface changes. Things might be labeled differently or look differently, but the conceptual stuff is all up to date. So we'll put that link in too, because that's another conversation that takes a while, but it's one of the first things I do with people. So yeah, let's just go with the link.
Yeah, I like that. We'll go with the link in the show notes. I think especially for college students, I mean, if you don't already have a LinkedIn profile at all with a professional headshot, I mean, what are you doing? Like that,
Yep.
that is like the entry. That is your ticket to a job. And that's the first thing that I do is for anybody who I'm interacting with, whether it be on the Fraternity Foodie podcast, whether that be professionally in my company, the first thing I'm doing is going to check out your LinkedIn profile to learn
Yep.
more about you. And if you
Yep.
don't even have that, I mean, what are we doing? And
Yep.
what are we doing? The
Yeah.
whole point
No.
to going to college is to get a higher paying job. So LinkedIn is the place to build that, to get testimonials there, to get, to list out all the keywords of all the positions that you're trying to get in order for somebody to find you.
LinkedIn's got some incredibly good support and help videos and training. So you could go look at my LinkedIn profile, see what I'm doing, and just replicate it in your own voice. Use what's appropriate and discard what's irrelevant because you're doing something different than what I'm doing. But the way that I use each of the sections and the way that I have my picture set up and my tagline set up and some of the recommendations, it should make sense to you. So you could go copy mine and put your voice on it. But the LinkedIn cheat sheets, that'll be very helpful for the kids as well.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So Mark spells his name Mark. Last name is spelled Aylward. Look him up on LinkedIn and take a look at his LinkedIn profile. And I think that will give you a really good template for you to model yourself after and put everything in your own voice. Just do what Mark is doing. I mean, literally, just copy what he's doing. And I'm telling you, that will give you a big leg up over other students that are looking for similar jobs. Now, the other question that I have, let's assume that LinkedIn didn't exist for a minute. Other than LinkedIn, what else should college students be doing in order to get their dream job?
Yeah, the 6 degrees of separation to Kevin Bacon game.
Sure.
It's an absolute truth. Everybody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. So what you do is you find your purpose, right? Which is a significant exercise. It might take days or weeks or months, depending on how much time you have. Then based on that, you start to craft your story. What is it that I'm going to tell people when they say, what do you want to do? What can you do? Who do you want to be? Why do you want to do that? You need to have answers to all those questions, and they need to be concise, and they need to make sense. It needs to be clear when the person that you're talking to. A lot of people on LinkedIn right now, because of all the layoffs, Mike, are just like tossing out, hey, if you have anything for me, let me know. Like, what can I do with that? I can't do anything with that. When you ask someone, so to answer your question, you start asking people questions. But when you ask them questions, you have to have the ability to articulate those things. This is what I do. This is what I want to do. This is why I want to do it. And this is why I think I can do it, even though I don't have a ton of experience, because of these other life experiences where those skills are transferable. And to our previous discussion about people want to help, if you are concise, if you are respectful, if you are articulate, almost everyone's going to want to help you, right? So you just start that ball rolling, but you do that homework first.
Mark, I think you make some really good points, which is that every CEO that you're going to meet, they're all going to ask, what do you do? That is like a universal question. So knowing that, let's all be prepared for that question and actually think about what the answer is going to be to that question, not if the question comes, when the question comes.
That's right.
And I love to start out with a success story, right? You
Mm-hmm.
kind of hit on it with that storytelling piece. Start with a success story. Even as a college student, maybe you're involved with a fraternity or sorority. Maybe you're on an athletic team. Maybe you're involved in student government. I don't know. Whatever it is that you do really well, what I want you to do is pick out one story where something is going really, really well in your college campus, in your organization, and actually start that conversation with this success story and have that story in mind when you go to a networking meeting or a networking conference or whatever. And that's what you lead with. And that helps to illustrate what it is that you do and what you do really well and what you're looking for in terms of future opportunities.
Yeah, one of my favorite questions, and I've interviewed and hired hundreds of people.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite questions was, tell me about the most difficult thing that's ever happened to you in your life, and tell me how you came out the other side. Because now I know, are you personally accountable? Are you a good storyteller? Are you responsible? Do you look at hardship as an opportunity to learn, or you're going to whine about it? You learn so much from that question, but it's also a question that every one of your listeners should be prepared to answer.
100%. Well, let's test you. I mean, you've had certainly many wins in life and you've had some losses as well, just like all of us have, by the way. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want people to think that everything is roses for Mark or me or anybody. We've all gone through difficulties, 100% of us.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, given the wins and losses that you've had in life, I mean, if you had a redo, imagine that there was this button that you can push and basically say, I'm going to do this over again differently. What would you do differently about your life?
Yeah, I was reflecting on that, and when I think about the three most important people in the world to me, my kids, if I did anything differently, I might not have them. So I struggled with that, and then I thought, all right, well, cut something out. I'm like, when I went to college, I started playing basketball in high school as a junior, and I didn't know what I was doing. I learned, and by the time I was a senior, I was a starter, and I got to shoot. I had the green light to shoot wherever I wanted, so I got good quick. But I didn't have a foundation of good coaching, fundamentals, or experience. And when I went to college, particularly at Notre Dame, I chickened out of trying out for the basketball team. And if I had it to do over again, I would have tried out because I was a late bloomer physically.
Yeah.
So when I got there, I was this scrawny 6'2" 155 pound guy. A year and a half later, I was 6'4.5", 220 pounds. I didn't give myself that chance. And if I had any regrets, I regretted that for a few years. It's been a long time since I regretted it, but it's still the case that I should have done it.
Yeah,
You
you
know,
should have done it. You
I
never
should.
know. I mean, maybe, that could have led to something, some opportunity that you didn't have today. So I think, the lesson there is just go and try. I mean, the worst thing that would have happened is they would have said, no, you're not going to make the team. That would have been the worst scenario,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
I
Yep. No,
mean,
it's for many years into my 20s, I thought about that too frequently. You got to move on no matter what it is, good
yeah.
decision, bad decision. But yeah, taking risks, I think, is underrated. I think we're scared all the time. We're scared too much. And the world is just scaring us more right now.
Mm.
And I think that, don't be. If you're scared, more often than not, it means you should do it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Listen, I mean, I got to where I am by taking positions that sometimes were I was a little bit over, my skis in taking. But I think
Mhm.
that's where you learn. That's where you challenge yourself to grow. And I think, you do have to take some smart risks, not stupid risks. You have to
Yep.
take some smart risks in life and you have to overextend yourself a little bit in order to learn and to grow. And I think, especially with Gen Z right now, I just feel like they're afraid of making mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the world is, whether it's the media or politicians or the entertainment business or professional sports, they're all manipulating us with fear. And it's not, I mean, it's been going on forever.
Yeah.
It's sometimes the dial gets turned up and sometimes it gets turned down. But that goes back to something I said earlier. Just because someone in a position of authority says you have to do something a certain way doesn't mean you have to. What it means is, let me look into that and let me see where the alternative opinions are. Let me see what other people are saying about that. Not just accept it because he or she's at a podium and has a title, not to be disrespectful of authority, but to question everything and
Mhm.
don't just go along to get along, you
Yeah.
know?
Great advice. I really like that a lot. Now, I know you're in Orlando, Florida, and I love really good food. I get the sense that you like good food too. So, where in Orlando should I go for my next great meal?
Yeah, there's a lot of great places here, and I gave it some thought, and I actually looked up the name of the place because I've gone there. I forgot the name. It's called the Black Rooster Taqueria, and
Okay.
it's Mexican food, and it's on Mills Avenue in Orlando, and it's fabulous. It's difficult to get a seat, and they're open short hours, but you won't go wrong there, Mike.
That sounds good. I could always use a good Tex-Mex or just Mexican restaurant. It's something living in Nashville, I just don't really get a lot of that. And it's something I always look forward to. So if I can find a good restaurant, I'm going to go and check it out. So you better believe the next time I'm in Orlando, that's exactly where I'm headed.
Yeah,
I
look
can't
me
wait
up.
to try it out. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll meet over there. We'll get some tacos and we'll talk about life. It'll be a great conversation, I'm sure.
I look forward to it, Mike. I look forward to it.
All right. So if our listeners, if they need career development coaching, which I am sure probably 100% of our listeners could use, where should they go in order to connect with you?
So there's two spots that I'd recommend. My LinkedIn profile, which we alluded to earlier, you can get to me through I got all my contact information. I'm pretty transparent on LinkedIn. I think it's the LinkedIn name and then / Aylward Mark, I believe. But there's not many Mark Aylwards. Most of them are in London because it's an English name. And then my website, where you read that testimonial, is 7, the number 7, and then pillars, PILLARS global, GLOBAL.com, 7pillarsglobal.com. But I also redirected markaylward.com to that site. So, and everything can be gotten from there.
Yeah, that's all really good stuff. And definitely take a look at that LinkedIn profile. If nothing else, I think it's going to give our listeners a really good template for their own LinkedIn profile. And again, Mark spells his name MARK, and the last name is AYLWARD. Go and check that out today and then contact Mark so that way he can help you with some career development coaching. He's a great person for you to bounce things off of and just kind of talk about your future career and your goals and how you can get there. I think having a mentor really makes all of the difference. One of the things that I'm acutely aware of is that Gen Z, for advice, they typically go to other college students for advice. And, that can be not helpful sometimes, especially when we're talking about careers and jobs and all of that stuff. Sometimes there are things that you can avoid in terms of your career making mistakes if you go to a career coach or somebody who's just been there and done that. They can help to shortcut your path to success instead of making the same mistakes that Mark and I have made in our own careers. There's no reason for you to repeat that. Okay,
Yeah.
so go
Yeah.
and get a mentor.
Yeah, it's even the most well-intentioned people can give you bad advice, and not on purpose, just because we all live in our own worlds and we all have our own worldviews and our own context. So, but people like to help. Just get out there and be brave, be courageous, take risks. Mitigate those risks to the extent that you can with research, and take chances.
Fantastic. That's a great way to end the show. I really appreciate all the advice that you shared with us, Mark, today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Mike, for having me. Those were great questions. I really enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to having another one sometime soon.
That sounds good. We'll do that in Orlando. And to all of our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation with Mark, what I want you to do is like it on social media, and I want you to share it with other college students. It's really, really important that other college students get to hear from Mark, hear some of his answers to some of these questions, because all of you are hyper focused on getting your job and your career going, and Mark can help you to get there. So I think this is really important to share. So please do that. And we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and we're going to see you next time.